welcome to the Granny Square series. Today you can learn how to make this pretty primrose square. And these we'll be using Stylecraft Special DK yarn. We're using stone for the middle, buttermilk for the petals, pistachio for the leaves, toy for this last round here, and then you can use the pink pale rose to edge your square if you want, which looks quite cute. So let's get started. I'm making a double magic circle using a 4mm hook, chain 1. So we're going to make 6 2-stitch clusters, that's US doubles, UK trebles together, 6 of them, with a chain 2 space between each stitch. So to make my first stitch, I've already chained 1, I'm going to chain a second time and then make the first 2-stitch cluster. And then chain 2. And that's our repeat. So we're going to do that 5 more times to make 6 stitches all together. And I'll meet you at the end of the round so that we can pull our circle tight. I'm just making my last cluster stitch now. Chain 2. So to pull our circle tight, we're going to pull the tail just a little bit. See which loop tightens first and pull that one tight. And then pull the tail. Nice and gentle if you're using delicate yarn, And then we're going to slip stitch into the first cluster that we made. And that finishes round 1. So round 2, we're going to make just a little chain round so that we can sit our leaves on it later, So we're just going to chain 3. And then we're going to slip stitch into the top of the next cluster. Chain 3 and then slip stitch into the top of the next cluster, and we're going to go all the way around like so. Chain 3 and slip stitch. So it's a nice easy quick round all the way along, so that at the end you will have 6 chain 3 spaces. And when you get back to the end, just slip stitch. And then we're going to cut our yarn. So I like to do 2 chains, cut the yarn, and then pull the hook out. And then I just push those chains down to the bottom. So that's how it should look after 2 rounds. So for round 3, we're going to be using the buttermilk. We're going to start with a slip knot. And we're going to go in on round 1. So we're going to take that chain 3 and turn it back, And we're going to go into the chain 2 space. So you want to make sure that that chain 3 is behind. We're just going to pull the yarn through. Oops, I've got my tail in the way there. To slip stitch. And then we're going to chain 1. So we're going to make all of our petals in these chain 2 spaces from round 1. And we're going to start with a US single, UK double. Remember to keep that chain 3 space behind, So we make 1 US single, UK double, and then we're going to make 6 US doubles, UK trebles into that chain 2 space, and then we will make a US single, UK double at the end. So each chain 2 space will have 8 stitches. So after your 6 US doubles, UK trebles, we're going to make one more US single, UK double in there. And then we're going to go across to the next chain 2 space. And remember, keep that chain 3 space behind. Then we make our 6 US doubles, UK trebles, and then lastly a US single, UK double. So 8 stitches in each chain 2 space. And I'll see you at the end of the round. So I'm just finishing off my last petal. Just made my 6th US double, UK treble. I'm going to finish off with that little stitch, the US single, UK double. And then we're going to slip stitch into the first stitch to join. Yeah, and there we go. There's round, well, I guess it's round 3, isn't it? But there's the petals made. So we're going to cut the yarn again. Same as before, I like to chain 2. Cut the yarn and pull the hook out, and then just push your stitches down. There we go. So I know that primroses actually have 5 petals, but it's not easy to work with 5 in crochet, so 6 petals, and it gives that feeling of a primrose. Now we're going to make the leaves. We're going to start with a slip knot. Yeah. And we're going to be working in those chain 3 spaces that we made on the second round. So if you turn your work over, you should have all these chain 3 spaces ready to work in. Yeah. So make sure that you've got the right side of your work facing you. Yeah, you're going to turn a petal down so that that chain 3 space is showing, and we're going to go into there and just slip stitch to join. Yeah. So we're going to make in each chain 3 space, we're going to make a cluster stitch, two stitch cluster, chain 1, and then a 2 stitch cluster and chain 1. So I'm going to chain to start my stitch. So here you can start to weave over your ends as you're working. If that's not too fiddly for you. And there's the first cluster, chain 1, just like to move that along, make sure it's over to the side, and then we'll make the second cluster. And chain 1, and then we're going to hop over to the next chain 3 space. So we're going to do the same thing, make a cluster stitch, chain 1, and then a second cluster stitch, chain 1. So at the end of the round we'll have 12 clusters and 12 chain 1 spaces. Yeah, and I'll see you at the end of the round. So I'm just making my last cluster now and chain 1, and I'm going to slip stitch across into that first cluster stitch that we made. And then slip stitch into the chain 1 space, and that's how it should look after that round. So we're going to start the next round by making the corner. We've slip stitched into this chain 1 space. We're going to chain 2, and we're going to make a cluster stitch, 2 stitch cluster stitch. We're then going to chain 3, and then we're going to make another cluster stitch into that same chain space. Oops. You just get some slack. We're then going to chain 2, So our corners we make in the chain spaces, and the edges we're going to make into the stitches. So we're going to skip that first stitch, we're going to go into the second stitch and make a US single, UK double, chain 2, skip the first chain space, and then into the next chain space we make our next corner. So that's a 2-stitch cluster, chain 3, and another 2-stitch cluster. We then chain 2. So working into the stitch, we skip the first stitch, go into the second stitch with a US single, UK double, chain 2. So we skip the first chain space, go into the next chain space to make the corner. So we make a cluster, chain 3, and then another cluster. Chain 2. So working in the stitch for the edge, we skip the first stitch, go into the next stitch with a US single, UK double, chain 2. So we're going to make our last corner. We're going to skip the first chain space into the next one. We make a cluster, chain 3, and then another cluster into that same space. Chain 2. So we skip the first stitch into the next one. We make a US single, UK double, chain 2, and we should be back at the start. So we're going to just slip stitch into the cluster. And that's the end of the round. So we're just going to chain 2 to cut our work. So now moving on to the toy, make a slip knot, and then just you can go in wherever you want. Start with whichever space you want. We're just going to make a granny square round, yeah? So using these chain spaces for our granny square. So whichever stitch you started in, if you're in the corner, it'll be slightly different. We're going to chain 1. And we're going to make your starting US double, UK treble, however you like to do that. And then make your second stitch. So I like to finish the group at the end. So I always only do 2 stitches to begin with. And then we're going to go into the next space, make 3 stitches. US doubles, UK trebles for the whole round, yeah. When you're at your corners, we're going to make 3 stitches. I'm going to weave that end in. Chain 2, and then 3 more stitches. I have enough yarn, hold on. So you're going to do the same thing in each corner, yeah? 3 stitches, chain 2, 3 stitches. You can see I'm holding that yarn and crocheting over it as I go along. So we go into the next space, make 3 stitches. And like so, all the way around. So I'll see you back where we started so we can finish that group off, yeah. So I'm just back to where we started. If you remember, I only made 2 stitches at the beginning, so I'm going to make that 3rd stitch now. Oops, that didn't work, did it? Let's go in and actually grab that yarn this time. And then you can slip stitch to join. And I just think it neatens it up a bit by putting that starting stitch in the middle of the 3 stitches rather than at the end. I think it makes it a bit more obvious if it's at the end. And yeah, you can give that a little block. If you're making them as part of the wildflower blanket, then you're gonna, that one's come up a bit bigger, look. You know, it happens. This one's been in the box for a while though, so it might just need a little bit of a block. Yeah, if you're making them as part of the wildflower blanket, then you're gonna want to do an edging before you join. And I'll see you in the next video.